Welcome to Social Justice Parenting. My name is Sheri West, and I'm the founder and CEO of LiveGirl. And along with NC Moms and the New Canaan Library, we are so thrilled to bring in Dr. Traci Baxley tonight. At LiveGirl, we are on a mission to build confident, inclusive leaders, and the social justice parenting philosophy that Traci describes in her book of cultivating spaces of belonging is so perfectly aligned to our philosophy. And that's why I'm especially thrilled and honored to introduce her to you tonight. I'm going to start the conversation with Traci with some questions, and then we're going to open it up to you all for questions here tonight. So first, to introduce Dr. Traci Baxley. She has quite an impressive resume and bio. She is a consultant, coach, author, speaker, educator, and mother of 5. She now is also a best-selling author of Social Justice Parenting. Dr. Traci Baxley is a professor of education who has spent 30 years teaching diversity and inclusion. And she offers in this book the essential guidance and curriculum that parents have been searching for. She is, as I mentioned, a mother of 5 herself. And she suggests in this book, it's such an eye-opening statement for me, that parenting is a form of activism and encourages parents to acknowledge their influence in developing compassionate, socially conscious kids. So welcome to our session here tonight, Traci.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you for tuning in from Florida. I'm up here in the Northeast where we're still experiencing winter. But this topic is gonna, I think, warm my heart a little bit because it's such an important one. I first just want to talk, Traci, about how much I loved this book. And I really thought it was just so different and eye-opening. Not only is it so well written, but it's just chock full of resources for parents. It's chock full of journal prompts and conversation prompts, activities, and other resources. It really truly is a guidebook to social justice parenting. And for that reason, I'm so excited that New Canaan Moms has generously purchased 50 books that we'll be gifting to parents, because I want to get this book into the hands of more parents, because I think we will have better parents in a better world when they read social justice parenting. So thank you for that. So let's just jump into the interview. I read a very impressive and lengthy bio, but I'd love to start. It's one of my favorite questions. If you could start by telling us something perhaps that Google doesn't know about you.
That's really hard for me because I am pretty much an open book. Like, I really tell a lot about who I am in the book, but I don't really know. Like, I love sports, right? I love playing and watching and definitely cheering on my kids in sports. Maybe it's a fun fact about me is my favorite sound in the world is the laughter of children. That's something that brings me a lot of joy, whether they're my kids or not. I love reading. And maybe that's evident by my book list, but that's something that's really important to me, trying to find time to sneak away from everything and do a little bit of reading to stay up on, things that I love, topics that I love to read. I am a big nonfiction reader or biography reader. So those are some like quirky facts, I guess, about myself.
Oh, I love that. And it's such a beautiful answer about the laughter of children. And I miss that. I have 3, but 2 are gone to college, and I have 1 high schooler left in the house, but I miss that laughter of children in my household. So I can definitely relate to that. So you've done so much in your career. You've been educating for over 30 years. Can you just tell us what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, I think it was a culmination of all of these parts of me, right, coming together at the right moment. And obviously, my kids were instrumental in all of that. Being a mother, motherhood itself is really my North Star. It inspires everything that I do, every way that I move in the world. It's really about how do I create a better world for my kids and all the kids in it than the one that I was given. And so that's always the lens that I look at my life through. But I would say in particularly, there was an incident that I talk about in the book when my oldest son at the time was experiencing really high anxiety, and he went missing one morning before school when he got kind of wired up about not having his homework, and those little things started to kind of set him off, and he wasn't thinking very rationally. And as a Black mom, you know, there's a different level or a different way that we worry. When he went missing, and in my predominantly white neighborhood, it really kind of stoked this paralyzing fear that I had about if I taught him enough, if he was still safe, what would happen if my neighbor saw him running through the neighborhood, like what would that look like for him? And it was a thing that propelled me to get all these things that were inside of me on paper. And so it was through that incident that I decided I couldn't live in fear, like parenting from this place of fear anymore, that I really had to think about, as a mom, I want to be able to protect your children, and how do I create an environment where my children can be protected by other moms too.
Wow. As a white mother, obviously, I can't imagine that fear, but I know that the world is a better place because of this book. And I just am so amazed that you took that fear, and from that you focused it, and that focused the energy into the writing of this book. You shared with me when we were talking before tonight about how you actually wrote it during the pandemic, and you said that allowed you some extra time because you were no longer commuting the kids to school. And my response to that was like, yes, but you had 5 kids underfoot. So I just think you're a marvel in so many different ways. But in the book, you talk about intentional parenting and parenting as a form of activism. You had a quote in there that just shook me. It said, as parents, we have no greater responsibility or privilege. Raising loving, compassionate, conscious children is the ultimate act and reward of activism. Can you just expand on that? Parenting as a form of activism?
Yeah, I think, you know, what we do and what we say to our children in the private spaces of our homes eventually reach the public spaces, right? And so I think our children will take the values that we give them, you know, whether they're explicit or implicit, right? They will take those out into the world. So if we are showing up in a more intentional, more thoughtful, more present way, the things that we are delivering to our children really are forms of activism in terms of what they see, what they do, will be repeated out into the world, right? So we really want to be conscious about the decisions that we make, because they are the things that our children will use as they start to navigate the world as adults. And I think the more inclusive, the more loving, and the more peaceful world that we want to create, we have to be very intentional that we're creating those same kinds of things in our own house. And so the very act of raising compassionate and kind kids starts with us being compassionate and kind to ourselves, right? The act of that. And then the way that we treat our children and we teach our children to treat other people. And I think those are the things that are going to change the world as our children leave us and take those values with them out in the world.
I think it's such a powerful message, especially for the parents of younger children, because sometimes as you're modeling and as you're having conversations with your kids, you're not at the younger age, 5, 6, 7 years old, you're not sure if they're resonating, but then suddenly they manifest as the kids get older. And I remember recently, my eldest, who is a college junior, shared with me an essay he wrote for one of his college classes. And in it, he wrote about how I was his moral compass, and that the work that I did with LiveGirl was inspiring him to make more positive change in the world. And he's never said those words to me, but suddenly as he gets older, he's manifesting it, and you realize it was that aha moment for me that, you know, all this modeling that I've been doing is just so important, as you write about in this book. So I want to pop the bubble of innocence, because I hear comments or I hear questions about, you know, when should we start engaging with our children on the topic of social justice? How do we move past the discomfort of talking about race? Can you talk? And you hit this head on in the book, and so I just want to bring that out here for discussion.
Yeah, I think whether you are verbally saying it or not, they are picking it up, right? So if you wait you are giving the world a chance to decide how your children feel about social issues, social justice, racism, or whatever that thing is. Because it's all around us. They're picking up our nonverbals, they're picking up all the things that we may not be saying. And so the best way to really combat that is really to have those open conversations. So when your kids are having questions about it, right, they already know you're a safe space to come to. So whether we realize it or not, they are picking it all up. And the research really shows us that by the time they're 6 months, they already have they already recognize racial differences. By the time they are 2, our nonverbals, whether it's body language, whether it's facial expressions, we know kids at that age mimic everything. And so they are putting together when you're a little bit more tense, maybe somebody came on the elevator with you, maybe we're riding in a certain neighborhood, those little things, our kids are picking up on those things as early as 2. And then by the time they're preschoolers, the research shows that they've already engaged in this kind of in-group bias, right? So they're choosing people who look like them as their playmates. And if we're not having conversations about that, these are the natural things that our children are going to do based on the world we live in, right? We live in this racialized world that separates us sometimes by identities. And so it's going to be up to us to really have these conversations so that we are pushing back against some of the things that they see in the news or they see on their phones or whatever that is, and really being deliberate. Again, that idea of being intentional about how we want to parent and what it is we want our kids to walk away. I know I love being vulnerable in front of my kids because sometimes people are afraid of that, but it really gives them a chance to practice compassion and empathy with me. Um, and then it also builds that habit of doing those things so that when they go out into the world, it's easier for them to do. And often when you look at trying new things, which includes social justice work, it's uncomfortable. You know, when we start a new exercise regimen, it's uncomfortable at first. So I think that we move through that discomfort in a way that we take small actions and then we keep repeating those things over time. So just like everything else in your life, it takes practice to build these habits. And it's important that we are intentionally building these habits with our kids.
Yeah, and there was something you wrote in the book that just resonated with me about moving past the discomfort. You wrote, learn something new, acknowledge the fear, move through the discomfort, take action, repeat. And it's just such a simple but powerful mantra on how we need to proceed forward in this work. You also write that the only way to raise children who can dismantle racism is to identify it, talk about it, and push back against it. Especially in the world today, as we move past the murder of George Floyd and the national reckoning on race, this conversation is so important. So what are your tips about bringing in current events into the social justice parenting?
I believe in having teachable moments, and current events is a great way to do that. It's a great entry point for you to start talking about things in the world that are important to you and the messages you want to teach your children. Like right now, with everything going on with Ukraine and Russia, right? It's everywhere. And if I'm not having those conversations with my children right now, they're going to be picking up messages from Twitter. They're going to be picking up messages on their phone, on the news. Um, I want those messages to come from my kids, for me. I want them to know how I feel about that, where we stand, what our values are, why it's important, because we don't want the world to teach our children what is important to us. And when they are getting these other messages, we want to create a safe space to really have dialogue around that. I'm not saying that having our children learn one perspective is good. It's not. I want my kids to learn different perspectives, but I also want myself and my husband to be a safe space for them to come to be able to unpack some of those things. So I
Yeah.
think current events is a great way and is a great entry point for us to start having those conversations since it's going on all around our children.
Absolutely. And Ukraine is so important that we're having kind of comprehensive conversations. I know at LiveGirl, we've been talking about this because we're on a mission to build inclusive leaders who care about the world. But we've been having the conversation about not only with the Ukraine crisis, not only the tragedy of the Ukrainian people, but the tragedy of the racism that's been shown with the refugees. So it's important to have the comprehensive conversation and making sure that our children are seeing all points of it, right?
Absolutely.
And I love what you said about creating this space of belonging. Actually, I thought it was the most beautiful thing in the book when you really just boil this all down to one simple fact, that as parents, we need to create these safe spaces of belonging in our home and then move outward, so that when our kids go out into the world, they know how to create safe spaces of belonging for others. And it was such a beautiful concept to me. I literally, like, here's the book right here. And I literally was like hugging the book when I read it. But can you just talk a little bit more about that, about creating that space of belonging and what that means to you?
Yes, I think it's the lowest bar that we should set for ourselves with our kids, really, right? It is just this idea of basic human needs, a basic human right, really, to feel like you belong. And our homes have to be the first place that our children feel that, because they're not always going to feel that in the world, right? There are going to be situations in our children's lives where they don't fit in, or they feel like they don't belong, or there's some negative energy around them. And so we always want to have spaces, whether that is a physical space in our home, right? Some people create physical spaces where there's a quiet spot, where there's candles, there's aromatherapy, there's some things going on where kids just need time to just time out, right? Or it's just a psychological safe space where my kids know they can come to me and talk to me about anything. Sometimes I say to my kids, am I listening as a mom, or am I listening as a friend? Because then I know not to wear my mama bear hat. So I think if our kids know that you're a safe place where you're actively listening, you're not necessarily trying to fix everything, that their feelings count. And I think that's a lot of times I see a lot of parents tell their kids how they feel, like, oh, you're not hurt, or that's not that big of a deal, right? It is a big deal to them in that moment. And so allowing kids to have and own their own feelings, whatever they are at the time, even if they're different from ours, even if we don't agree with them, is really important for them to feel safe and heard. And then they're able to do that up to their friends, right? Or to people that they know, because they've had such experiences at home doing it.
That's again, it's so beautiful. It's such a, and I just want to loop back to your concept on teachable moments, because you focused on this in the book, and beyond the teachable moment of a current event and making sure you're sparking that conversation about what's going on. But you talk about teachable moments in everyday life. Like if you're sitting and watching a show or a movie and you see something, that's not fair, or that's racist on the show, that you actually, that can be a spark for conversation, and to tee it up, hey, I don't like this show because of how they're making fun of people or whatever it is. But can you just expand on the whole concept of using the teachable moments in day-to-day life to really further the social justice parenting?
Yeah, and we can do this in, in my education world, we call it teach out loud, right? So that the things that are going on in our heads as adults that are common, and we do without thinking as we're making decisions, right? We're going through a million different decision making in our minds as we're making one decision out loud. And so sometimes, especially when my kids were younger, I would have these conversations that are going on in my head out loud as I'm making decisions. So my children will know that when they're making decisions, right, there should be a thought process behind it, right? We're not just saying the first thing that comes to our mind. We're being thoughtful of how we use our words. We're being thoughtful of how we use language. We're being thoughtful about how we are thinking about other people's feelings. And sometimes you could do that through TV shows when you're watching with your children, right? I often will pause something if we're watching a movie. My kids don't always love it, but I'll say, you know what, if I were in her shoes, this is what I would be thinking. Or I wonder what she was thinking when she made that decision. What do you think she was thinking about? Or how do you think that made that other person feel when she did this action? So I think having those conversations out loud with yourself, showing them or talking about them when they're watching movies or you're reading a book out loud with your children really gets them to start thinking about their own decision making, right? And I really um, think about how we raise children who can self advocate. And that is really a way to teach our kids, especially when I think about our girls, right? We often live in a society where we teach our children, our girls, to be seen and not heard, right? To not be able to be thoughtful in their decision making or being open and boastful about their decision making. But I think it's really empowering that we really talk to our girls about being decision makers and advocating for themselves in situations. And it really starts by us doing little things at home as we're teaching them, as they're growing, as we're having these conversations at home, because we're really building foundations and we're really building habits. And we definitely want to raise girls who are assertive and who can self advocate.
Yes, we do. And all of that's amazing. But I just want to say that I don't think my kids would let me pause the movie for discussion. That would not fly in the West household. But I appreciate the approach. I have one more question and then a quick activity, and then we'll open it up for any audience Q&A. But the book, as I mentioned earlier, is just chock full of tools and journal prompts and conversation prompts and kid-friendly activism ideas. So how do you recommend that people really use this book or leverage this book as a guidebook in their parenting journey?
I I think to me the most important place to start, and I think it's in chapter 2 if I'm not mistaken, but the values chapter where you are creating family values. Um, because I think to actively, intentionally, out loud, written on paper, discuss with your families about what your values are, um, is really important to all of the other decisions that you make in your life. So I would say if you're skipping around in the book, if you're not doing the journaling, I would say to really lean into the values chapter. I believe that's in the belonging chapter, which is chapter 2. Um, and do that with your children. Really ask them, what are the values that are important to our families? What's the legacy that we really want to leave for each other as we grow up, as we go out into the world? Because I think when we get off track, when we get busy, when things aren't right, when things slow down, when things go too fast, we can always say, okay, how does this align with our value? Is what I'm doing, is what I'm saying, connected to what we say was important to the family? Like when I'm screaming at my kids about something, I've lost control, right? I can say, or my kids can say to me, Mom, that doesn't align with our values. And I have to check myself. You know what? It doesn't. I need 5 minutes in the safe room, right? Give me 5 minutes. And when I come back, I'm going to be better and I'm going to be able to talk to you in a way that aligns with our values. You know, if your kids are missing curfew, that's a conversation because they know the values of the home, right? So what did you do and did it align with our values? And the values really, I say, serve as like a GPS, right? They get you back on track when your family or something that you do or a feeling that you may have does not align with the values. So I think starting with the values is really important. A lot of people have emailed me and say that they are reading through it first and then they're coming back to do the prompts. So I think whatever moves you, but I think it's important to know your values and know your why statement as you're reading through the book, because I think that can help guide the other information, how you use it in your life and in your family's life.
Yeah. And I read through it, but I've got my family was like cringing because I was highlighting and putting lots of sticky notes and to come back to, and they're like, you really shouldn't like do that to a book, but I did. It's like my textbook.
I do that too. I do that too. I'm like, when I gift you this book, you're gonna have all of the important things already highlighted. Right. I do too. I take notes in the margins and highlight.
Okay, so we're gonna do just a quick activity and then we're gonna move to Q&A from the audience. So before we open up for Q&A, I just wanna ask everyone to, if you have handy a paper, a pencil, you can even use your iPhone if you need to, but it's an activity from Traci's book, but it's also one we frequently do in LiveGirl. It's called A Circle of Trust. And so what I want you to do is to write down the initials of 6 to 8 people whom you trust the most, who are not family members, but basically in your circle of friends, your network, your most trusted people. So I'm just going to pause for a moment while you do that. So write down the initials of 6 to 8 people whom you trust the most. Okay, so let's call this group that you've just identified your trusted circle. Now, what I'd like you to do is put a check beside those members of your trusted circle who are similar to you in gender. So if you are a woman and this person on your list is a woman, circle or check mark that person. Now do the same thing for race, ethnicity. So if they share your race or ethnicity, circle or put a check mark next to that name. Now do the same thing for age. If they're around your same age, put a check or circle. And finally, for nationality. If they share your nationality, put a circle or check. And now I just want you to reflect on your list. When we do this, and research shows that when white people do this, about 75% find that there are no diverse people in their trusted circle, in their network. And so what this really simple but powerful exercise shows is that we do tend to surround ourselves with people who are like ourselves, and that it really needs to be intentional to build authentic bridges to people whose lives are different than our own. And that's part of the purpose of social justice parenting. We need our kids to do that as well. Again, this is just one simple, powerful activity from the book. There are so many others. But at this point, I would like to open it up for questions. And if you'd like to ask Traci a question, you can either put it in the chat or just use the raise hand feature, which I think, yeah. And we'd love to get some questions, so please raise your hand. Wait, Amanda, I think you see the question. If someone's raised their hand, I think you see it, not me. So you can just call on people, or if anyone wants to put a question in the chat, we can do it that way as well. Okay, I see Marie has her hand raised. Go ahead, Marie, unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Hi, Traci. I'm a librarian and educator at New Canaan Library. I'm not currently a parent, but I was wondering, especially because you have an educator background, what you would suggest that I could help support our New Canaan parents in this journey. We have the book, we're giving the book out. It's an amazing book, but I didn't know if there's anything else that I could do to help support the parents in New Canaan.
That's a great question. And I often say you don't have to be a parent to engage in social justice parenting, that is for sure. I think, having it a part of your library selections is, I thank you for that. First of all, I really appreciate that. I know a lot of libraries are doing a book club around it. So if that's something that you guys may be interested in, I think that may be a great idea. I'm actually doing a couple of drop-ins with a few libraries that are doing it for a book club. And I think also, maybe there's a way that you could, I don't know if you work in the children's section at all.
I do.
But I think the more adults that are around these children showing compassion and kindness is really great. Maybe the rocks could be something that you guys put up in the library. I'm actually having and maybe you can email me, I'm actually having like a poster made of the rocks by a local Black artist. That could be something that as a reminder to parents to practice the rocks, which is part of the framework for social justice parenting. It's about reflection, open dialogue, compassion, kindness, and social engagement. So those are a few ideas that maybe could happen in the library.
Thank you, Tracy.
You're welcome. Thanks for your question.
And we have another question from Allie.
Hi, thank you guys for putting this together and doing it. It's a joy and a pleasure to listen to you guys talk. But question was about the age. So I know I'm like very aware of the 6 months and from there on out. So my kids, just for reference, are 8, 5, and 1. And we lived in Brooklyn, very diverse classrooms, neighborhood, and then moved out to Connecticut. And it's obviously like the 8-year-old is most in touch with that difference. But I've also heard, like with the current events thing, that like exposing them to certain things, like obviously it's a conversation, but I'm trying to figure out more of like at what age you have certain conversations. Like the 5-year-old was like catching some of the Ukraine news, and that felt like really inappropriate, or basically inappropriate, because I don't think that she could understand the like fires and the bombings and the everything they were talking about. So just a little bit more, like maybe I actually haven't read the book and I'm excited to, but like a little bit more on age. I would love to know both current events, but also I mean, anti-racism, like what, different topics, like what?
There's a chapter on there that I really kind of break down how you talk to kids, how you have open dialogue with kids at different ages. But I'm a big proponent of they're never too young. I mean, I've always talked to my kids about everything. It's just a matter of how much I tell them. So obviously, you know, like you said, seeing the bombing and doing all that and seeing all, you know, all of the fires and all those things may be too much for your 5-year-old. But having conversations around it, that things are going on and why, is something that I think is appropriate, because they are going to hear things around them. And it's a way to also let them know that they're safe, right? These are going up in the world. Mommy and dad are here. We're going to keep you safe, right? But other people are experiencing things in the world. So it's a way to, as counterintuitive as it sounds sometimes, having the hard conversations in your home really makes them feel more in control, because the message is coming from somebody that they love and that they trust. So I think having the conversations early is okay. How much you give to your children, and also not just by age too, but you know how sensitive your children are, you know how much they can handle. But I think it's a disservice to them to not do it at all.
Yeah. Thank you.
And obviously the conversation you're going to have with your 8-year-old is going to be very different from your 5-year-old in some senses, right? There's some things that you can have together, but there may be more things up for your 8-year-old that you may have more detail about on certain topics than obviously you would with your 5-year-old.
Thank you for the question, Allie. And we have a question in the chat from Haley. She just said, as a parent of a toddler, are there any other specific resources or ways I can practice social justice parenting? We use books a lot. And if you want to just mention, there's a very rich resource section at the end of the book. Tracy, I don't know if you want to mention that and just any other ideas.
Yes, so there is the last chapter in the book, which is a appendix really. I talk a lot about critical media literacy, right? How it's important to not just read books to your children or not just watch movies with our children, but really having conversations around it. And so there also is a book list for birth to middle school, through middle school. And they are grouped by age and grade level, and they're also grouped by topics. So all the topics in the book, like anti-racism, belonging, compassion, kindness, open dialogue, all of those, they're also grouped according to the topics in the book. But I think also at that age, what's really important to do, reading the books is great, having diverse toys, having diverse friends, all those things are really important. You know, if you're going to story time in a library, maybe go to a library that's not your typical library, taking your kids out to festivals and that are exposes them to differences. I also think it's really important that as we bring professionals in our lives, like our doctors, our dentists, our pharmacists, our teachers, our tutors, and coaches, that we have diverse adults in our lives too. So our children can see that everybody who's in power, everybody who is intelligent or has a skill, right? They look different. So I think that's important too. And I think the most important thing that you do with your children at that age is just create that safe space, have conversations with your children, and the way that you show up is really important. So that requires you to do a lot of that reflection piece of how you show up, what you are intentionally doing in your life that is working for your family. I often talk about thinking back to our own childhoods, right? There are a lot of things in our own childhood that we loved and that brought us a lot of joy. And we want to keep and we want to continue those traditions and those ways of being and ways of practicing with our children now. And there are things in our childhood that no longer serve us, but they could be habits, right? So we have to intentionally make sure that those things that no longer serve us, that could have been negative, that we are consciously leaving behind. So I think when your kids are young like that, it's really great to start really working on those self-reflection pieces and start to create these values of what's important to your family and the way that you want to raise your children, so that as your children are being raised, right, they are naturally fitting into some of the things that you find important in your life as a parent and as a human being, right, doing for others.
Thank you. Great question, Haley. And we have one more question from Sharon.
Good evening. I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing your story with regards to your son and what you experienced with him. That truly is reality. And it's like, no matter how much you try and you do to go into another community, instill education, morals, and values, you know, it's to the point where you start to question yourself, is this good enough? You know, and how do I get to the point, to the place where, you know, they're recognizing that, you know what, yes, I am good enough, taking all of the other pieces out of the equation. And my other comment is directed to you, Sheri. I just want to tell you, thank you, thank you, thank you for all of the diversity that you bring to the LiveGirl program. And you're just a blessing to these young ladies.
Very nice.
Thank you for your kind words, Sharon.
And I thank you, Sharon, for mentioning that. I think part of this whole part of the social justice movement for me was about showing parents who didn't look like me that especially as a Black mom, it's really important that other people know my story, right? They know the narrative, they know what the dialogue that we have with our children. You know, people talk about the talk, right? But I also think it's really important that we also acknowledge that part of the talk is really teaching our kids to love who they are, to love the skin they're in, to really relish in their ancestry and all of the sacrifices that were made, and that they are the generation that their ancestors have cultivated for them to do the things that they do. So I think it's really important to, as a mother of color, that I am very proactive with teaching my kids that life can be challenging, but also life can be very beautiful, and that you can find peace outside of the house in a way that you balance also this idea of being cautious. But I also really want to acknowledge that, yes, it's important that we all create villages outside of our homes where all of our children can feel safe. And I think that was the premise behind this book, is like saying, we are better together, right? We're stronger together, particularly as moms. You know, the book is for all parents or all people who are in the lives of children, but there's something really special about a mom, right? Because when we look at all the movements and all the things and all a lot of policies that have changed, it's been because a group of moms have gotten together and said that this is enough or that we need to make these changes. So I think if we are that strong in our homes about making the changes that we want to see in the world in our own children, I think over time the rippling impact that we can have raising our children who are inclusive, who are open-minded, whose hearts are open, who sees other people and see the humanness in other people, it's going to have massive changes in the world that our children are growing up in and our children's children, right, get to see.
Thank you, Traci. Thank you, Traci, so much for sharing your expertise with us. So in closing, we've just got Marie Aspinwall from the New Canaan Library is gonna just give instructions on how you pick up your free book. So Marie, if you wanna say a few words.
Yes, hello everybody. So if you are living locally and can come up, pick up the books at New Canaan Library, we will have all of the books ready to be picked up on our hold shelf. You get to take them, you get to take them home, you get to highlight and write in them as much as you want. They're yours to keep. If you don't live locally but live in Connecticut, please email me at child@newcanaanlibrary.org, and this will be in the follow-up email as well, because I can send it to your local library where you can pick it up. However, if you do live out of state or out of country, you'll have to contact LiveGirl to get the book into your hands. Otherwise, we are so happy to get Traci's book in. Really, it's wonderful. It's perfect. It's got a reading list where we have, I think, almost 98% of the books listed there, if not 100. And definitely, you know, take the books out from the library and write in this wonderful book.
Awesome. I would love pictures of the books being written in and tag me on Instagram.
Okay, Traci, I'm gonna send you mine.
Yes, do.
So Traci, thank you so much. We're so grateful that you wrote this book and that you shared your expertise with us tonight. Thank you so much. I know for me as a parent, I feel like reading this book and meeting you has made me a better parent. And in closing, I just want to read the line from your book that you said, remember, when we create safe places of belonging in our home, our children will grow up to create spaces of belonging in the world. And what a beautiful thing that is. And thank you for helping us accomplish that, Traci.
Thank you. I think our intentions are the same with both of our companies, right? With both of our organizations. So I thank you for the work that you do as well. And thank you for having me.
And we did pop in the chat. If you want to learn more about Dr. Traci Baxley, you can find her at socialjusticeparenting.com. So thank you all for attending tonight and happy reading. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.